Too often, we try to reach the end goal in one day, but end up quitting because it's too difficult to do. Walking for 15 minutes might not be your goal of walking for an hour, but it's better than not doing it at all. Adding fruits to your unhealthy diet might not be the perfect diet, but it's better than before. You can't leap to your end goal in one day. You have to get there step by step, better by better. That makes the changes more sustainable. Let your goal be better and you'll go further. Emily Marutin. And with that being read, I want to welcome you back to the 127 Fit podcast. Today's guest is a sustainable health practitioner, dog mom, and the creator of the Inner Athlete. Today's guest is Ashley DePaulis. Ashley, I want to welcome you to the 127 Fit podcast.
Thank you, Quentin.
Absolutely.
I'm honored to be here. Really.
Cool. Very cool.
I'm excited.
I'm excited to have you as a guest today and kind of just give you the opportunity and the platform to share your story. So we're going to start off today with a book. So is there a favorite book that you maybe gift often, or is there a book that you're currently reading that you've found pretty impactful at this stage in your life?
The book I tend to recommend often, especially to women, is called The Gift of Receiving by Amanda Owen.
Okay.
And the reason that I do mention that book to women is because sometimes there's a block that they have to receiving. They always feel like they need to be giving because they're in roles of motherhood or roles of support. Maybe they're a caregiver for their family and they put everyone else before them.
Right.
And to be able to understand that receiving is not selfish, that they need to give to themselves first and let others give to them. Even receiving something as simple as a compliment can be huge. So that's one, when I have particular clients that need that I'll recommend for sure.
Cool. Awesome. Now, is there a book maybe that you're reading right now that you would like to share?
So right now, I've been jumping into a book about, how do I put this, female health.
Cool.
And how, as females, we need to be connected to that part of ourselves. So that's part of our creation, where we create, whether that be children, whether that be a business, or what we're birthing into the world, and how, when we're not connected to that centered part of ourselves, that it can be much harder to the process to unfold.
Cool.
So
awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's good.
Yeah.
Do you have? I know before we started the 127 Fit podcast, you had mentioned that you also are a high listener of podcasts. Listen to a lot of podcasts. Is there a favorite podcast or kind of a go-to podcast that you enjoy?
Yeah. So my favorite is Lori Harder's podcast, Earn Your Happy.
Okay.
And then probably my second favorite is actually her husband's podcast.
There you go. A family affair.
Yeah. Huh? Chris Harder, his is called For the Love of Money.
Okay, cool. And so the Earn Your Happy podcast, is that... What's kind of the impetus behind that, or kind of what's the focus of that one?
Yeah, so she is a fitness expert turned lifestyle entrepreneur, and she does a lot of personal development.
Okay,
so
cool.
She interviews all kinds of women who own businesses or play in that field.
Okay.
And so it's a lot of, and it's very fun. She's very fun, lighthearted, but you learn a lot. There's a ton of value, and
awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. Now, is her and her husband, are they like here in Colorado, or they live somewhere else?
They're in California.
Oh, California. Okay, cool. Yeah. I asked that because I listen to like we talked about before we started the podcast here, a lot of podcasts, and I can't tell you how many times I'm listening to just some random podcast, and like the interviewer asks the guest, like, hey, where's your gym at, or where you live? Oh, I'm in such and such place in Colorado. I'm like, what? That's crazy. You know? So, because there's just so much wellness stuff in the state. So
yes,
that's why I wanted to just maybe check on that. So, all right, Ashley. So let's just start digging in a little bit about your background, and let's talk about, if you don't mind, maybe where you grew up and kind of like what your childhood was like. Just kind of paint a picture of kind of some of the stuff that we're going to unpack later on in the podcast.
Yeah. So I was born and raised until I was about 9 in upstate New York.
Okay.
And so there is where I experienced all kinds of outdoor play, from boating, snowmobiling, just playing outside in the woods. I mean, it was great. Lots of imagination and play, which I think children are all about anyway, when they can be. I felt like I had tons of freedom to do that. And then from there, we moved to Texas. So I lived in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, middle school, high school. And that's where I would say still outdoor play, all of that. And it's where I got my foundation of athletics. Because if anyone knows anything about Texas, they're all about athletics.
Yep. Especially football, right? Like
Yeah.
It's definitely a football state. I know that.
Yes.
So.
And then.
So what if you don't mind me asking, what athletics did you get involved in then?
Purely. So at first it was like you had to take athletics as part of your curriculum.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I kind of like that.
Yeah, it was really cool. I learned how to strength train. I learned and just playing sports like basketball, just trying all kinds of things. Okay. So I've never been afraid to try new things, where I think some people are.
Exactly.
If they didn't have that growing up. And I would play rec sports. I played softball. I played soccer. I tried running track for the school, which wasn't very successful. What else did I do? I was always playing in the pool. That was more of like a play thing.
Right.
But yeah, soccer and softball were like the two biggest ones. And skiing. So that's how I kind of got connected to Colorado. Even though I learned to ski in upstate New York. I would travel when I lived in Texas, and anyone who lives in Colorado and is listening to this, they know that Texans come here and go skiing.
Right.
So I would come here and ski, and that's how I knew one day I wanted to move here.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. So, like your family environment and stuff, did you have any siblings and things like that? Do you feel like you had a pretty close-knit family, and if so, how did that play into kind of just your graduating high school and you becoming the woman that you are today?
Yeah. So my family, yes, very close-knit, and I would say I can attribute a lot of just my health habits to routines and healthy eating and cooking practices that I grew up with, and always having dinner together and all of that foundation, I think, has served me well in the role that I play now in my world of coaching clients. But then, what else did you ask me? You asked me...
I just asked about, like, if you had any siblings, and then just how the closeness of your family, if that was the case, how that kind of has, created the woman that you are today.
Yeah. So I'm an only child.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I think that's always propelled me to connect with other people, but, friendships and other families and being part of their... It's funny because I've been part of other people's family units that have siblings. I think because I always wondered, like, what is it like to have siblings? Right. But as an only child, I never felt growing up that I wanted a sibling. As I've gotten older, I'm like, oh, that would be really cool to have that, of course.
So especially being an only child, at any time when you were growing up, was there maybe something of an obstacle to overcoming that, or did you have any negativity like in your heart or in your mind because you were an only child? Because I know, I mean, usually for the most part, if I think about it, I mean, most people used to have one other sibling. Usually there's a couple kids in a family, if not, maybe 3 or 4, but definitely there's usually another sibling. So how was that for you? Did you ever experience anything where it's like there was maybe some negativity, not necessarily from other people, but just maybe an inner struggle that you can kind of recognize or pinpoint?
Yeah. So I think on one hand, it's really like the positive of it is you feel comfortable around adults and interacting with them, and you kind of get to mature more quickly in ways. And then on the flip side, because you're the only child and you're kind of not necessarily between your two parents, but you don't have anyone to bounce things off of about your family unit. And I think I definitely have gone through the struggle of who am I, like, in this unit? Who am I outside of this unit? I think we probably all go through that.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think in having a sibling, maybe there's, like, more of a way to mirror. Where I think I didn't have a mirror for a long time or didn't realize how other people were that mirror. Right. So, I think it's the mirroring piece. Cool. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I appreciate you sharing that because, again, I just think being an only child, I know there was some people, when I was growing up, they were an only child, and just from my perspective and interaction with them, it's just unique. It's just like somebody that's left-handed. I mean, there's a lot of people.
I'm that too.
Are you really? Okay.
Only child who's left-handed.
That's great. I love it. That's good. But so that's two unique things within kind of our culture within the United States. It's like, there's a lot of people that, are only child. There's a lot of people that are left-handed, but there's a lot more people that have at least one sibling. There's a lot more people that are right-handed. Yeah. So it's just kind of some unique things, and maybe one of the listeners out there can glean or learn something from you, and just kind of that experience of maybe dealing with being an only child and maybe some negative things from that experience, so.
The other thing I think about here too is that being shy part, because I think with a sibling, I obviously don't know for sure, like your sibling might push you a little bit. Or notice where they can push you, and your parents aren't there with you in like your social setting when you're growing up so much. Right. So I think some of that can be missed. So I tend to be more, when I'm first meeting people, more quiet or shy, and then I'll expose who I am. Yeah. There are a lot of people like that, but I think having a sibling that could have like pushed me out of that comfort zone a lot sooner. Right.
I just know, as myself being a school teacher and also having my own life experiences, each of us today, whatever, life experiences after, we left our home, whatever age we are today, whatever, college we went to, all that different stuff, still today, we are products on some level of our home environment from childhood. Yes. I mean, obviously we have our mom and our dad's DNA in us. That's something that we all know, but I'm more specifically talking about, whatever experiences we had when we were developing, our minds were developing, our bodies were developing, our hearts and all of that, our intuition, all that stuff was developing. Whatever that environment we grew up in, our home life, is still I don't want to say maybe a stronghold today, but it's still a big part of who we are today. Not saying that we can't change, we have to do the same thing our parents. No, I'm not saying any of that, but we are all products on some level still to this day until the day we die of our home environment when we were growing up. So that's why I just kind of wanted to peel back that layer there, Ashley, in regards to being an only child, because it to me, and I think probably to a lot of other people, it is kind of a unique experience, and not everybody goes through that. So I appreciate you sharing that, and I hope and I know that'll connect with some of the listeners out there. So I really appreciate you opening up about that. Now, you had your childhood, Texas. Now, you said you spent time in upstate New York, then you moved to Texas. Is Texas, was that kind of the final place for your childhood until you left home and things like that? Was Texas, or was there another move in there? Or?
So there was another move, but I was 17 or 18. Okay. Maybe no, I was 19 at the time. Okay. So went to North Carolina. That's where I went to college. But my parents had moved there first.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And we were talking before the podcast started, the accident piece mixes in with that experience.
Okay. So
So
now let's, you went to college out in North Carolina, you said, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so let's move into college, what you studied, and then whenever the January 1999 accident happened, let's start peeling back the layers of that.
Yeah. So I went to school in North Carolina, the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Okay. Everyone always asks if it's Chapel Hill or one of the bigger name schools, but it was UNC Charlotte, and it was actually perfect because it's like a medium-sized school. Yep. So for somebody who's an only child and isn't like in the middle of all the things all the time, like some people like to be, it was great size, and they had a health and exercise science program, which so interestingly, with how the accident is plugged in that experience, I started studying that after my accident. Though, growing up, so one funny story in 3rd grade was there was a girl in class, and her name is Brittany. Okay. And I don't know where Brittany is today. Brittany, if you're listening and you remember this, reach out. Her name was Brittany, and kids were making fun of her for being overweight or more developed than other kids in the class.
Right.
So I thought it was a good idea. I have no idea where this came from, but I said to Brittany, I was like, let's go home to your house after school and play. I have an idea. So my idea of play at the time, because I was like, I can help you. My idea of play at the time was to have her jump rope, to have her walk along the landscaping for balance. I had my stopwatch.
That's awesome.
I was having her like run up and down the stairs.
So
I was her coach.
Huh? That's awesome.
So I've always had this ingrained interest in health and in fitness. So going back with college, I started studying health and exercise science after my accident because I had gone through this experience. So I was in an accident at the age of 19. I was hit by a drunk driver on the interstate, was in the car with my boyfriend and my dog, and broke my back, broke other bones, and had to recover from that physically, obviously. At the time, because I was so young and didn't know about all the things, it was a physical recovery, and that wasn't overly challenging to me. Was it a process? Yes. Did I get glimmers of I am not the same? Yes. And I kind of, at the time, put all my attention into my physical training and studying health and fitness, because for some of the time I thought maybe I want to go be a physical therapist and help people like I was helped, and so I just started playing in that arena at that time.
Now, the accident in January of 1999, you were driving. There was a drunk driver. No, you weren't driving. Oh, okay. So
I was passenger.
Okay, so you were in a vehicle and there was a drunk driver that hit the vehicle that you were in, correct?
Yes.
So I want to talk about, because that's a huge life-altering event, and we'll continue to move in that direction in regards to the inner athlete and all that. But I just want to take a step back for a moment, Ashley, and I want to talk about kind of some of the emotions and the feelings and some of that type of stuff that you had to deal with during and through that first accident, because we've all had, I've been T-boned and had a vehicle that I was driving completely totaled, and there's a lot of emotions and just things. I walked away from it, thank goodness, but there's just a lot of emotions, in that moment of being hit by another car, and then somebody was there and they ran up, oh my gosh, are you okay, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of feelings, there's all kinds of emotions. We're all humans, we all have that stuff. What were some of those feelings and emotions that you had to deal with, maybe post accident, and how did you deal with that and overcome some of that stuff in kind of a tough situation that you were put in, not by your choice at all?
Yeah. Whew, that is, I think there's been so many levels of it. At first, I think I approached it from like the physical standpoint, and you just, how do I explain, like the athlete mindset of like, this is what's in front of you, and this is what I need to overcome. The emotion piece actually didn't come in until many years later, because I broke my back, and where I broke my back, it was the lumbar region of your spine, and that region is actually all about emotions.
Okay.
And I think for a long time I had trouble feeling or processing emotions, and that's also part of PTSD.
Right.
And so I think I was a little detached from that for a long time. And so I was just like, okay, this is the situation. This is what I need to do. I had amazing doctors. Actually, my one of my surgeons is the surgeon for the Dallas Cowboys football team. So amazing orthopedic care surgeon. So it's like I had these people around me who had the mindset that I needed to develop. One emotional moment, though, I can tell you during this experience was this doctor I just mentioned. He said to me, and this was before my surgery, days before, it wasn't the day of, thank goodness, but he said to me, have you ever heard the ABCs of life? And I'm like, no. And this is when I'm lying in a bed and can't move, and I've been lying there for days because I was in like surgical ICU. I had to be flown to Texas because they couldn't do surgery. The accident happened in Louisiana. So I was laying around for days. And so I tell him, no, I've never heard of that. And he said, adversity builds character. And I just started crying because I think there was a part of me in that moment, even though I can't really tell you, like I didn't have a thought about it, I just started crying. A part of me that's like, I didn't ask for this. Like, this isn't fair. Like, why am I going through this type of thing? And from that moment on, after hearing that, I think I connected adversity, one, in a positive light to, yes, you can overcome anything that's put in front of you. And yes, I believe that. But I think I also connected it to the more adversity I experience, the more character I'm going to have, which, no, I don't believe that. So that was a big emotional moment. And then I just know other things from, seeing my parents be emotional about it. And that, yes, I felt that. But I think at the beginning I was more curious about like the other person and what about their life. And I even have that interest now, but it's like, what about their life made them choose to make these decisions that they've made? Is where my curiosity landed at the time. And I think that was my way of processing and understanding, like, why would this happen and why am I part of it?
So if you don't mind me asking, after that accident, did you ever have any interaction with the person that hit you?
So I did not, because she had a 0.21 blood alcohol level. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt. And she was going in the opposite direction on the interstate, and she actually crossed the median of the interstate, and her car landed in front of us, and she died.
Wow. Okay.
I found out a little bit about her family and background, which wasn't a very good background in terms of, ideal situation.
Right.
So I get kind of why this might have occurred for her, but no.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty intense. Now, I want to, because this January 1999 incident wasn't the only accident that you've been in. Just spending some time on your Instagram account and reading one of your posts where you kind of opened up about some of the accidents and adversity that you've had to overcome in your life. You also mentioned an accident in 2013 and 2017. So just kind of briefly, and I know before we hit the start button on the podcast, you also mentioned that you've been in some other accidents outside of those three. So let's just, just to kind of speed things up a little bit and kind of get past this, but I also want you to share a little bit because it's very important to your life story and who you are today. So just quickly, Ashley, why don't you just talk a little bit about some of these other significant accidents that you've been in, and then let's start talking about PTSD and kind of how that term and just you realizing that maybe you were suffering from that, how all of that tied into these accidents and birth from the accidents and that realization that you had it and how you have had to kind of overcome PTSD or continue to have to daily just kind of overcome some of the side effects of some of these traumatic events in your life.
Yeah. So here's where I want to start with that, because I think it'll give kind of a good overview of why these things might keep happening in our lives. So sometimes it is a product of our conditioning. This wasn't that situation. But when a boundary is broken, so we all have our personal boundaries that we set, but we have boundaries around us. And when trauma occurs, a boundary is broken. And so, and I didn't know this for a very long time, but the reason things can be pulled into your energy field, like the numerous accidents that I've had, is because there was an energetic boundary that was open. Because interestingly, these accidents have all happened on the left side.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's not my fault that they've happened, but I've had an energetic rupture in my boundary, in my space. This energetic rupture for anybody can be filled, so this doesn't keep occurring, and I have since filled this rupture that I didn't know I had for a long time. But it's why people may have had similar experiences that are trauma related over and over and over again because of rupture and an energetic boundary space. So, so going into 2013, I had an accident here in Denver where I was T-boned on the left side, and that's when I learned, just through a family friend who was a psychologist. She said, since this is significant, maybe not as significant as my first accident, it can bring up things from that accident. She was like, so I think you'll probably want to work with somebody who can help you with post-traumatic stress disorder. So I'm just that curious, and I'm like, okay, I'll go do that.
Right.
It wasn't necessarily that I can remember at the time that I was like, oh my gosh, I feel... I know after the accident I felt like, whoa, kind of like you're pushed into another, not really dimension, but like you're stuck in this space.
Right, okay.
That's what I can kind of recall it as. And so I went and started healing that process. I was healing PTSD. I was healing physically because, interestingly enough, so after my first accident, even though I had back surgery and broke many bones, I didn't experience pain afterwards. I didn't experience having to do physical therapy long term or anything. I just had a physical therapist in the hospital. But in this accident, I was doing physical therapy for like almost a year, had pain, and that's when PTSD, because it gets lodged in your tissues, in your muscle body even, that's where some of this pain can be expressed in the body. So I learned a ton, and that's when my healing process really began. And then any consecutive accidents after that, it was because this energetic boundary was not closed. Mm-hmm. They weren't overly significant in that I had to do any long-term, like I wasn't injured, I guess is what I'm going to say. But it was like it peeled open another layer of the healing process is what it really did. To get to the point of healing this energetic boundary and feeling more safe in my body, feeling more safe driving, all of those things.
Okay. Now, for myself and the listeners, mm-hmm. because this is a world or a realm that I'm not familiar with at all. Now, I have gone to a naturopathic doctor mm-hmm. to get like food sensitivity testing done
mm-hmm.
and some things like that for gut health, mm-hmm. and she was very focused on kind of the energy fields, and she mm-hmm. tried pulling my fingers together, while in the other hand I was holding some different vitamins or minerals and things like that. That's really the only experience I've had with an individual that had any knowledge about kind of the energy fields, and obviously listening to different podcasts and being heavily involved in health and fitness myself, I've kind of heard mm-hmm. on the fringes some talk about that, but mm-hmm. for me personally, it's never really interested me.
Yeah.
So for myself right now, and then also the listeners out there that are unfamiliar about kind of the energy fields and what all this stuff is, mm-hmm. can you just maybe expound a little bit about kind of the energy fields within us, and then mm-hmm. just a little bit more specifically talk about like what an energetic rupture is, because you stated that you felt like as you've researched and studied and lived more life, the energetic rupture was something that needed to be addressed mm-hmm. so that these negative accidents or these negative events would stop happening in your life. So could you just maybe peel back some layers for us in regards to that?
So, okay, I'll make this as easy as I can.
Okay, cool. I need it simple and
I'm going to make it like super practical in terms of the health and fitness piece.
Great,
so between the time 19 and 31, 32, however old I was in 2013, I heavily relied upon my fitness, my physical strength, my physical being, everything physical, to manage PTSD that I didn't know that I had. So in doing that, and not to say that I did it in an unhealthy way the whole time, because I didn't, but there came a point where it was when I had a desk job, that the work environment wasn't really all that great. That stress level. So when you have PTSD, stress is held in your body. And movement, yes, is one way to help release it, but it's not the only way. And since it was so significant and there was surgery, so that's like another trauma. So it was like trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma in your body, and I was only using physical activity to release it. Then I had this other stressor of a job that I didn't really feel that comfortable in because of the work environment. So I started at that time boxing, and that felt really good to me. Mm-hmm. And I started getting into more high intensity workouts that felt good, because the only way at that time that I could actually rest and relax was to exhaust myself, which was not healthy. A lot of other people do that same thing. Mm-hmm. They may just not know why. I can look back now and understand it all. So I used the one tool. My body and myself was smart enough to do this. Like, I needed to be active. I needed to move. It was healing. I built myself up after that accident, built my body back, all of that. But then, now I forgot where we were.
No, you're fine.
So
just kind of the energetic rupture.
Yeah.
And just kind of what that is, and then just the energy fields. Like what is the when somebody says, when somebody else says energy field or energy fields, like is that something that has to do with inside of us? Like what is that?
Okay.
And then when there's an energetic rupture that you referred to earlier, and that being the cause of these reoccurring accidents in your life, and you have to kind of fill that rupture, or fill that void, however you want to word it. Like what is that? Yeah, what is that?
Okay. And I'm like, I understand it.
Yeah.
I am not a teacher of it.
Right.
So, the first time I would say that so PTSD is energy. It's stress that's locked in your body. So that's energy. And technically, we're all energy.
Right.
Everything around us is energy. So we have the energy, like our heart, for example, puts out an energy field, electromagnetic field, 5 feet around us.
Okay.
So that might make it more digestible for people that you have energy around you. You are energy. We create energy. You feel other people's energy when you meet them. You feel either good around them, or you're like, oh, I want to stay away from that. And we don't always know what it is. We just feel it. It's a vibration.
Okay, cool.
Is that digestible?
Yeah, because I think all of us, we can relate to the fact that, hey, I'm around somebody and I feel, they might not call it an energy, but they have a negative vibe.
Yeah.
There's just a negativity, and so it's like relatable, right? Okay.
So that's one form. The energetic boundary rupture. So I learned about that through a physical therapist and colleague who is trauma trained. I am not trauma trained, so I'm not going to be able to speak to this as well. I've had the experience. But from what I learned through her is that when we've had a trauma, big or small, that it's a boundary rupture. So it's where we don't feel safe in our bodies, or a part of our body is affected by it. So one example she gave me, which may be helpful, is, for example, a kid who may have been hit by their parents on one side of their body, maybe continuously throughout their childhood. Not that I'm trying to take it there, but it's just an example or a visual of, and then that person starts experiencing headaches, and it's always on this side of their temple. Right. That is an energetic boundary rupture.
Okay, got it.
So it can be, it can be filled, and there's a process that the practitioner would take you through to fill that, and it's about, all it is really about feeling safe again in your body, and especially on that particular side, to ease either those symptoms, the one I just mentioned, or reoccurring events happening.
Okay, cool. That's good. That at least gives us a little bit of understanding. I just want, for myself personally, but then also the listener, just when you're talking, using some of these words, and I don't necessarily know what they are, I just want us, all of us, you, myself, the listener, just to kind of be on the same page so we can follow along, because I'm sure there's a person or people that are listening or going to listen to the podcast, and they've gone through some of the stuff maybe that you've gone through, or they've been in the military, and they're struggling with PTSD, and this might be some information that they can take and run with and positively impact their life. So I just want for all of us to kind of be on the same page and have an understanding of kind of what some of this stuff is. So that's simple, it's great, and it's appreciated. So
I think it's highly important, because a lot of times what I see is that people, they don't know what's out there to help these things that they may be experiencing.
Right.
And so they're kind of halted in their healing process, and they don't understand, and then they start taking that on as an identity, as like, oh, this is just me, I can't do anything about it.
Right.
And that's actually not the case. So
Amen to
So,
that.
yeah.
And that's a great point, Ashley, because in our culture and in our society, if you experience something traumatic or you have some sort of injury or what have you, there's kind of a routine or a way that we try to treat that. Usually it's, well, if it's, very severe, you're going to go to the emergency room. You're going to go through all these tests and doctors and physical therapy and all this stuff. And can that be helpful? Has that helped millions and millions of people and things of that nature? Absolutely. But in my life experience and some of my family members' life experiences and other people I'm connected with, we've realized that the traditional way that we treat injury, symptoms, what have you, cancer, all of that type of stuff, there's alternative ways.
Yeah.
And I know that my mom, who's my best friend, and her and I are on the same page when it comes to this stuff, and we talk about this all the time. And she's going through a process right now of, she went to a traditional doctor in our hometown, and she did her research. She wanted certain blood tests done to really dig deeper into kind of what's going on in her body and with her health, and that doctor refused her in regards to those tests. Well, we both know, because we do our own research and we're our own advocates, that there are a lot of tests out there that the doctors don't do that are better predictors or indicators of what's really going on inside. So my mom and I always talk about, we have to, ourselves personally, and then we also have to encourage other people to be our own and their own advocate. You need to study, you need to do your own research, you need to realize that there are other options, holistic, natural options out there that can have the same results as going to your regular doctor, or better results, or what have you. There's a lot of options, and with the age we're living in, with the information age and the internet and all this stuff, there's no reason why, if you have had a bad experience with kind of a normal doctor or hospital setting, there's no reason why that you have to continue to suffer and go through kind of that traditional outlet. There are other options, there are other outlets. And that's why it's awesome just you being able to share some of your experiences with the energy fields, and I know that will have a benefit for some of our listeners. So that's really cool. So listeners, I just want to encourage you, please, if you are experiencing something in regards to something mental or physical, or you just really don't know what's going on inside of your mind or your body, and you're just struggling, please, if you are kind of going through the traditional route and not finding answers, or being turned away and just giving medication, there's other options out there. And please contact Ashley, contact somebody else that you might know of that has a better understanding of some alternative ways to healing, because there's a lot of options, there's a lot of alternatives, and I know I've practiced some of those in my life. My mom's practiced them, Ashley practices them. A lot of people are practicing those alternative options, and they can be huge. So just be your own advocate, do the research, study. Your health is so important, and your family's health is so important. So Ashley, let's transition then into you being the creator, founder of the Inner Athlete. So why don't you explain to myself and the listener what the Inner Athlete is, kind of the impetus for that, and then also tying into you being a sustainable health practitioner. So let's just start talking about kind of like who you are today as a woman, your profession, your coaching, and what you're all about.
So I will say, to bounce off of what you were just reminding the listeners of, or encouraging them to do, is that no one knows your body and your life better than you.
Absolutely.
And all of you, the whole part of you, needs to be taken into consideration, especially when larger issues, health issues, come up. And so that is part of my experience in creating the Inner Athlete. So when that really came to being for me, so I mentioned within my accidents, I first really dealt with the physical piece. like physically healing, physically building my body back very strong, very healthy, and going on to live my life. So the physical piece to me was fairly, yes, was it challenging? Yes, did it take time? It was pretty easy. And a lot of times for athletes, the physical part can be easy. What's not as easy is the mental and emotional pieces that go along with injury, that go along with trauma, especially when you're a highly active person, depending on the range of what the injury is or what the health challenge is. So where the inner athlete was really born for me, it was two things. So one was in my accident in 2013, I told you, like right before that, I was boxing a lot, and the way that I would get my stress and energy out of my body was to do this high intensity exercise.
Right.
And so obviously in getting in an accident, so I told you in the first one, I broke my back. So the second one, my neck and my shoulder were a big part of my healing process.
Okay.
So I couldn't box. And so I was part of a community, and felt very connected to that community. And that's the other thing that happens with athletes and anyone else who's highly active, that your community is the camaraderie, all of that is such a huge part of why we love doing what we do.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's some of us who, yes, we compete with ourselves more than we compete with others, and then there are other people who like to compete amongst a team. But my community, it was because, yes, I like to compete against myself, but I like to do that in a community setting. I'm not usually a competitive team person. It's usually self-driven. So now that I couldn't go boxing and be part of that community, I'm like, and I'm pushed into this whole, now you're injured and you have to be healing. It's like, wait, where's that part of me who, feels energetic, alive, and strong, which are hallmarks of the inner athlete? How can I get that, or how can I connect to it? And I found myself just naturally, I would go to the boxing class, but I would ride the bike. So I could still be in the energy in the community that I loved so much. So that I didn't feel like my life just completely changed because this accident happened. I still kept myself plugged in, whereas it's very easy to isolate, for one. And it's very easy to be stuck in the story of, I can't do this anymore. And kind of your identity gets mixed or gets lost in that. So really, I did that naturally for myself and noticed that I was doing it. And I had the thought, for whatever reason, and I even told this to my boxing instructor, I was like, now is the time for me to do the mental game or mental fitness piece that I don't think that I had been doing. Like, it was so strong on one end of being this very strong person, and now I needed to kind of balance it out with, or become more well-rounded.
Right.
I think I was just so much in one direction and really not well-rounded when it came to self in areas of my life. So to give people, and then the other thing was I was working with clients at the time and really saw that they get their sole focus when it comes to health and fitness. It's always like, what do I eat? How do I exercise? And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much more to this than just eating and exercise. Yes, are those components, but the underlying foundation of how people were trying to approach that was not stable. And so it kept them constantly in a cycle of being on track or off track. If they weren't eating this particular way, then, oh my gosh, I'm bad, or I'm off track.
Right.
Or if I'm not exercising this particular way, I'm bad or I'm off track. So that's kind of how it was. The inner athlete was created based on my personal experience and what I was seeing with clients.
Okay.
And so you...
So with the inner athlete, is it, what is it specifically? Is it, do you provide, is it like programs? Is it some sort of like, study tool? Like what if somebody goes to your Instagram and here's this podcast and they want to find out more about you and what you do with the inner athlete, like what do you provide to an individual, and is it specifically just for athletes, or is it for anybody and everybody? So just explain a little bit like what you do within the inner athlete.
Yes. So I help everyday athletes. Okay, that's perfect. What I call them.
Yep, absolutely.
Versus, your ultra marathoners who they have their whole world. Help everyday athletes master their body-mind after an injury or health challenge so they can get back into action in life and athletic pursuits.
Awesome.
So the athletic pursuits can be anything from people who like traveling around the world and climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. There's different types of athletes.
Absolutely.
And so somebody may or may not consider themselves an athlete, but I can see the athleticism in most anything that we do. Absolutely. I think there's athleticism to our mental fitness, our physical fitness, our emotional and spiritual fitness. So all of that to me is kind of how are we playing? How are we showing up on those playing fields? Do they even exist for us? The hallmarks of the inner athlete that I've created and then help other people develop their own uniqueness to it is strong, energetic, and alive. So bringing in that playfulness, but also bringing in, so the strength to me speaks to like many levels, of course, physical, but also your resilience or your ability to be resilient. So the range between those two things. And I think the biggest thing that I've always wanted to impress upon people is that health and fitness, because we have so many trends coming out at us and like follow this, do this, blah, blah, blah. But what you and I both know, because we've lived it for a long time, is that it's very personal to you.
Right.
And what you may, be training in one day, in a few years, it can change to something else because you have a different interest area. So it's physical, it's personal, and it's connected to your unique human spirit.
Cool.
So the things that really drive and motivate you. So within working with me or somebody wanting to know about the inner athlete, you can consider it right now an avatar or a persona, a part of you that you communicate with. And the reason I say part of you communicate with is because when I mentioned back that I was so strong in that physical or using that physical all the time, to me now, with what I know, that was not my inner athlete in the driver's seat. That was some scared part of me that was driving very hardcore in one direction. But the inner athlete part, it comes back to that well-rounded.
Absolutely. In
the mental, physical, emotional, spiritual.
The whole being.
Yeah.
You are really focused on, from what I'm gathering as you share your story, is you are not focused on just the mind. You're not just focused on the body. You're not just focused on the spirit, but your goal in your coaching and your example in your life is to help people from sounds like to me the inside out, realizing like, hey, yes, the physical component of our lives here on planet Earth is very important. Yes, the mind is very important. Yes, the spirit is very important, but a lot of times, most of us probably have one or two of those that maybe they come a little bit easier to us, or they dominate our life over one or the other. So you want to take the everyday athlete and get them to, first of all, realize that, hey, we are more than just the physical. We are more than just the mental. We're more than just the spiritual or spirit, inner being. We are a whole being. And how can we focus on the health of the inner being, and then from that there will be an overflow or an outflow of just more strength and energy and being more alive in life in general. Is that fair to say?
Yes,
okay.
It's very on point. And I would say in my experience, the inside out approach. So for people who struggle with, the eating, the fitness piece, those things become really easy, or a lot easier, without like a lot of judgment, punishment, restriction, and control that can happen around those areas when we work from the inside out.
Very cool. Because
it's really, there's many different ways you can eat. You have to find, obviously, what's right for you. We've talked about that a little bit, but it's really having the inner being, all these things, the mental, physical, emotional, spirit part integrated.
Cool.
And that's where, to me, the sustainability part comes in, right along the lines of you saying that some people may be really strong in one area or two areas, but then they know something's missing. They're like, there's something more, but I don't know what it is, and I can't figure out. Sometimes that can be expressed as, I know I'm not as happy as I can be, or I feel like I'm settling, or I feel, some of that can be what comes up, or I keep dealing with this injury, or I keep dealing with this health challenge, and I don't know why. Very
cool. Now, I want you, Ashley, to speak to the ladies out there. What and we all have our own struggles and different things we have to go through in life, but just as you being a woman and some of the things that you've gone through as a woman, and then working with, I know that you work with male and female clients, but just overall, when you are working with female clients, is there maybe one or two things that you kind of see as a reoccurring theme or struggle, or something that they really have to overcome in their lives? And if so, what is that, or what are those things? And then maybe just share about how you could help that woman, or those women struggling with those things to get past those struggles.
Mm-hmm. I think a common theme, even for all of us, but yes, especially women, is the enoughness factor, feeling like we're enough.
So it's going back to that book that you like to give, right?
Yeah. Okay. Because I think sometimes that drive in either one area or two areas of life, we make that our identity. And when we're so strongly connected to a specific identity, when something comes in and wants to change that, or if there's a part of you that wants to grow, like maybe you don't cognitively understand this in the moment, but there's a part of you that's like, something doesn't feel quite right here, that most women struggle with this is what I've been doing. And I think most athletes, when they have to transition maybe from a sport or activity, this is what I've been doing. This is who I know myself as. Who am I outside of that?
Right.
I think it comes to, I kind of got there in a weird way.
That's okay.
It's who I am outside of that. Mm-hmm. So it's like centering back to themselves and getting on track with that, and really listening to their voice. And it could be that they were listening to a part of themselves, but not the complete picture. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I want to touch on, because this has been a big part of my life, and me figuring out who I am as a young man, and my passions and what drives me and what I'm all about is solitude. And I'm not going to use the word meditation, because that's kind of a word that's thrown out a lot, and I don't consider myself a person that meditates, but I'm very introspective. Mm-hmm. I do a lot of thinking. I do a lot of like self-analyzing, and I try to be very cognizant of the words I'm speaking, how I'm interacting with people. So with females and all of us, male and female in general, speak on, Ashley, the importance of taking a step back, maybe unplugging from the electronics, unplugging from the craziness and the chaos of the world and the life that we're living, and just really spending time alone and in solitude with your own thoughts, with your own self, and just thinking through things. Is that something that is very valuable in your life and should be something that's important in other people's lives?
Yeah. I think that, so one client is coming to mind right now. Women who are in leadership roles or in support roles where they're supporting others, whether that be at home or business, they are very distracted by that and making all that work. And how they usually speak about it is, I need to get this done now, I need to fix this now. So it's this very like masculine approach, because masculine, so going back to energies, we all have, no matter if you're male or female, you have the masculine, feminine energy. Yeah. Our culture and how we work and do business is all around the masculine. Correct. It's doing, pushing, fixing, all the proving. Aggressive, aggressive, yeah. And so women who are in that all the time can then start their energetic see, we're going back to energy. Yeah. Our energetic bodies can become exhausted. For this woman in particular, it became chronic migraines. And so, of course, under that experience, so she's working hard all day, putting all of her mental, emotional, physical energy there, shows up at home super tapped out, so that doesn't help relationship, even though she loves her husband. And she, in the past, would always exercise in a way that was very masculine. Right. So very strong and forceful, and those things aren't wrong, but under her particular circumstance, that sort of exercise isn't going to serve her right now. Right. So in coming into a coaching space, so you're talking about, is it valuable for people to be able to think through these things and understand themselves and know themselves at a level where they can shift their approach, pivot their approach when new challenges come up? Because it's not always, even though I talked about some heavy challenges, we have challenges on any given day. Absolutely. That might force us to change the way we're active. We may be traveling, and so we don't have as much access to healthy food, this, that, and the other. But what are small approaches and pivots that we can make in those moments that are actually going to support us long term and keep us consistent versus I can only do this when I'm at home because that's when everything is perfect. I think sometimes people get locked in there. But going back to her story, so in the coaching experience, it gave her time and space to look at these things and actually develop a plan that's going to work for her based on her life today. Because we don't learn as we grow and become adults and so on and so forth how to be healthy as we age. We hear things, or doctors might tell us things, but we don't really understand it at a level that could work for us, right, unless you're like you and me who just like eat this up every day. Yeah. And I can say, even knowing everything I know, I come up against moments of, okay, I know this sort of training isn't working out for me right now. I don't really know why, but I'm being drawn towards this thing. But going back to community, sometimes it can be hard to make those transitions because we feel really comfortable in a particular area, right, in a particular community. And what's it going to be like when we go somewhere else? Are they going to accept us? Are they going to, is it going to make me happy? You know, all these things start playing into our decision making, right, our thought process.
And I just really feel that the majority of people get lost in life. And what I mean by that is something for my own personal life. It's, you know, different experiences that I've gone through in my 20s and seeing different people of just like, it's the same, they live the same life every day. They wake up at the same time. They have they get their coffee at the same time. They, it's this routine of life. They clock in at their job. They clock out. They turn on the TV at night. They fall asleep in front of the TV. And it's just this cycle of being lost in life. And I really feel like, and I personally know that getting lost in life is a result from an individual or individuals not knowing who they are and why they're here on this earth. I just cannot speak enough about the importance of each individual, separate from a significant other, separate from their children or whatever community or group they're a part of. Yes, all of that is healthy and very important, but I cannot stress it enough, and I cannot speak on it enough to people about the importance of knowing who you are. And the only way that we can find out who we are is detaching, removing, getting away from the chaos and the craziness of life and everybody around us, and just whatever word you want to use. If you want to use meditation, if you want to use prayer, if you want to use solitude, quietness, whatever, we as human beings need to know who we are, and that happens through quietness and stillness. And being lost in life is a very common, normal thing, and it's something that I do everything in my own personal power to avoid, because I know that as human beings, there's so much more to life than being lost in life and just going through the motions and going through the routines and just clocking in and clocking out at the job and just kind of doing what we got to do to pay the bills and make it through another day. There's so much more to life, right, Ashley? I mean, that's and it comes through being still and quiet, finding out who are, going back to kind of the inner athlete, knowing our inner being, and what fires us up. Because like this whole podcast thing, this whole interview discussion that we're having right now, none of this would be if I personally didn't know who I am and my passions and what fires me up and what I'm all about, what I'm supposed to be doing in my life. None of this would be. You and me would never connect. You wouldn't have the platform at this moment to have the opportunity, the platform to share your story if I didn't know who I was. So there's a domino effect in life when one individual knows what they're supposed to be doing and what fires them up and what they're passionate about and what they love, and they go out into the world boldly and fearlessly and unashamedly and just pursue that with everything they have. There's going to be a domino effect, and other people are going to be positively impacted and encouraged and built up and fired up, and that's just kind of my perspective on things. And all of that comes from being quiet and still and reflecting and thinking about who I am and what I'm all about and why I'm here and what do I want this life to be.
Yeah, you have to really be able to hear. So that's our body is always communicating with us. Our mind is always communicating with us. Those two are not separate from one another. That's why I say body, mind. They're connected.
Absolutely.
It depends on how the connection is traveling, if it's coming from your mind, if it's coming from your body. So an example of that is like emotional trigger, like an emotion we can feel in our body. So that's something that's showing up in our body. A thought happens in our mind. Does that make us open up, or does that make us retract?
Right.
And so when you're speaking to quietness and stillness and mindfulness, that is when we can hear that communication, because it's a feedback loop. So how is it communicating? What is it trying to tell us? How can we take action on that? Because you were saying, it's all a domino effect. If you hadn't listened to this part of you who really wanted to create this podcast, tell stories, and your greater vision and mission of it, then we wouldn't have connected. So it pushes everybody, or it shifts everybody, the collective, into a direction. I'm getting chills just saying that changes how we experience life.
Right.
It changes how we're going to teach our youth. It changes everything versus when we are unconscious, because that when you're opposite of listening to, your greater calling, your greater purpose, then you're more unconscious. Everything you were describing about the individual who may be, clocking in, clocking out, not that we're saying having 9-to-5 jobs is not the thing to do, but just an example, and just, going home, having dinner, falling asleep, and doing the same thing the next day, that's more unconscious action. So you're not actually contributing in a way that serves you. You're not sharing your gifts as much with others.
Right.
And I think people don't do that because, one, they don't necessarily know what their gifts are.
100%.
And they're scared. I mean, it's scary to do, but it's so rewarding to do at the same time. But I think there's so much fear around that for people. And I will say, the woman that I was speaking about, her story a little bit, what ended up coming out, or parts of what ended up coming out, it was all about being connected back to self. She really wanted her relationship to be better, but she had been experiencing this chronic migraine condition that didn't. She wasn't really connected to the work that she was doing anymore. She once was, but wasn't anymore because it wasn't aligned with her values any longer. So it's, people are trying to get back to that, and we've not been taught how. So when you have like a safe container with a coach, or whether that be through any number of ways that you can express these things and get feedback and really figure out like what is here, that's when people get to step into finding out who they are and their purpose.
Cool. So we've been going
over
an hour. So we're gonna wrap things up here. I want to just ask you, what excites you? What drives you? What specifically motivates Ashley?
Yeah, so many things. Let me think what comes to mind right now. This conversation, sharing stories, hearing people's stories, helping open up people's eyes, or getting them to be more curious about how they may be able to do what's actually deep inside of them to do at a pace or at a rate. I think it's all about pacing. Nothing happens overnight, like the quote you shared at the beginning.
Absolutely.
How they can do it at a pace that feels comfortable to them, that feels safe to them. It's not about like totally rocking your world in one day or 1 minute, but getting people on that path to themselves.
Cool. I want to touch on the last thing that I opened the podcast with in describing you, and that's you being a dog mom.
Yeah.
So what's I mean, I know what a dog mom is, but what is your dog mean to you, and just kind of like what's your heart in regards to just animals maybe in general?
Yeah. Oh, I love my dog. He has the coolest story. So I told you before we started recording, he's from Iowa. His spirit is why I adopted him. He's from Iowa. He got into a chicken coop with another dog, killed some chickens, so he was sent out of Iowa. He went to doggy jail. So his story, I just think, is hilarious. Like, how can I not choose this dog?
That's funny.
To save.
Got kicked out of Iowa. That's gotta be pretty tough to do.
So I loved his story. I loved, like, I could, within that story, you can feel his spirit, his instinct, and he is just one big glob of love. Like, that's all he wanted. And I think that's why he probably left wherever he was living, because he wasn't receiving that. So I think animals in general just speak to what our innate human instincts are for connection, for love, for belonging, for being present moment, not getting caught up in all the chaos or doing of life. Dogs are more in their being. And I think we can learn a lot from that because we tend to be a lot in our doing.
Right.
And so it goes to the moments you were saying where you take time to reflect and really get to know yourself. Dogs are on it. And he always teaches me lessons or reminds me of lessons when I get stuck in the doing so much.
Right.
One recently, I just have to share this because it's so funny. We have a coffee shop down the street and they give dog treats.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And so, of course, he always wants to go there.
Yeah.
And
smart dog.
One morning, he wanted to go. I didn't have any cash on me or money on me to buy coffee, so I don't want to go and like just take dog treats.
Right.
Integrity. But he was like, no, we're going there. And so the funniest thing happened. I went inside and I asked if they, because I had my phone, so I was like, do you take Apple Pay? And they're like, no. And this gentleman, older gentleman, who I ended up getting to know, he was like, oh, I'll buy you coffee. And so my dog got treats. I got coffee.
There you go. Perfect.
All because he led me there.
Yeah.
So
and what's your dog's name?
His name is Sanders. Like the Colonel, because he likes chicken.
Love it. Good deal. So, being a middle school teacher, I get asked or hear kids talking about spirit animals, maybe to tie everything together here to end it. So, your spirit animal, would it be a dog or is it another animal? If you don't mind me asking.
So I have like a few. So I don't know. There's like this dino hanging off of that little rack over there, and it makes like a dinosaur noise. Like I love the T-Rex for whatever reason because I think they look cute with their short little arms. So the T-Rex is one. An eagle is another.
Why the eagle?
Because of their vision. They have very broad vision, and they don't tend to get caught up in details.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Good deal. So T-Rex and eagle for a spirit animal. Huh? I think that's a perfect place to end it. 'Cause we were talking about that's good. I like that. That's very, very good. Yeah. So Ashley, why don't you right now if the listeners want to get in contact with you, if they're here in the Denver area and they want to check out the Inner Athlete and maybe find a little bit more about what all of that is, how can our listeners get a hold of you or find out more about you and what you offer through the Inner Athlete?
Yeah. So they can connect with me on Instagram at the.inner.athlete. I respond to DMs all the time. They can also go to my website, theinnerathlete.co. And within my website, there is also a free guide that they can download if they have experienced an injury and health challenge and they're really looking to get back into action. There are practical, actionable tools, questions that they can ask themselves along the lines of what we were talking about here that can help them get in touch with that knowing of self.
Very cool. Thank you, Ashley, for your time today. And I really appreciate you just opening up and being very authentic and sharing your story and some of the things that you've had to go through to become the woman that you are today. So I just really appreciate your time. Thank you for inviting me into your home today as well. So,
thank you.
Absolutely. So listeners, I just want to thank you once again for hanging out with myself and Ashley, tuning into the 127 Fit podcast. If you guys want to get a hold of me, you can reach out to me through Instagram at 127 Fitness. Facebook is at Quentin Vars, and I also have the at 127 Fitness page on through Facebook, however you want to word that. If you want to find out or look into more of kind of my thoughts and what's in my heart through the expression of writing, you can check out my blog website, which is 127fitness.com. And I just want to encourage all of you listeners out there to please like, subscribe, share, and then most importantly, especially if you're going to listen to the podcast through iTunes, leave a review. that is just very helpful in kind of the podcast world for more people to come across the 127 Fit podcast when they're searching and things like that. So also, you can reach out to me through 127fit@gmail.com. If you have a comment, positive or negative, something that I can improve on, or maybe a question that you would want me to ask some of the guests in the future, you can send me an email if you think you might be a good fit for the podcast as a guest, or if you have a person or persons in mind that you think would be a great guest or great guest for the podcast. You can also just send me an email through the 127fit@gmail.com. Again, 127fit@gmail.com. And again, I just thank you guys for supporting the podcast. I thank you for tuning in each week and hanging out with myself and the guests. I do not take anybody lightly for you taking time out of your busy life and schedule and hanging out with us listening to the podcast. And per usual, I'm going to leave you guys with Proverbs 24:10, which states, "If you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small." This time, until next time, I'll catch you guys later.